The scorching sun hung like a malevolent eye over Snake River, Idaho, as Abigail Owens trudged down the dusty main street with a basket of wilted vegetables from her small garden plot. Whispers followed her like a shadow, growing louder with each passing day of the devastating drought that had gripped the region for nearly 8 months. She kept her eyes forward, pretending not to hear the accusations that had begun as murmurs but now rose to pointed fingers and open hostility. "There she goes, the witch who brought this curse upon us," Martha Hillman hissed from the doorway of the general store. "Not a drop of rain since she arrived." Abigail quickened her pace, dust billowing around the hem of her faded calico dress. At 23, she had hoped to start anew in this frontier town after the death of her parents back east. Instead, she'd found only suspicion and, increasingly, fear. The year was 1879, and the Idaho Territory was suffering through one of the worst droughts in memory. Crops withered in the fields, livestock grew gaunt, and the Snake River itself had shrunk to a pitiful trickle. The townspeople, desperate for an explanation, had found their scapegoat in the quiet, educated woman who had arrived just before the rain stopped. "Miss Owens," a deep voice called from behind her. Abigail turned to see Thomas Zachary dismounting from his stallion outside the sheriff's office. Her heart skipped despite herself. The tall cowboy tipped his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. Unlike the others, he never looked at her with accusation. "Mr. Zachary," she acknowledged with a slight nod, clutching her basket tighter. "Might I walk with you a spell?" he asked, looping his horse's reins around the hitching post. Abigail hesitated. Thomas Zachary was the foreman of the largest cattle ranch in the region, respected by all, even Sheriff Miller, who had lately been eyeing her with increasing suspicion. Being seen with Thomas might offer some protection, but it could also tarnish his reputation. "I would not wish to burden you with my company, Mr. Zachary. It seems I've become rather unpopular in Snake River." Thomas fell into step beside her anyway, his spurs jingling softly. "I've never been one to follow the crowd, Miss Owens, especially when the crowd is dead wrong." They walked in silence past the saloon, where several ranch hands paused in their drinking to stare. Thomas nodded curtly at them, and they quickly returned to their whiskey. "They say you brought the drought," Thomas said finally, his voice low. "They say you practice unnatural arts." "Because I know which herbs heal a fever, because I choose to read books rather than gossip." Abigail's voice trembled slightly with suppressed anger. "Or perhaps because I arrived with no husband to speak for me." Thomas stopped, turning to face her. "No. Because people are scared, and scared people look for simple answers. You're different, and you arrived when the trouble started. That's enough for them." A commotion from the direction of the town hall caught their attention. A crowd was gathering, men and women alike, their voices rising in agitation. "What's happening?" Abigail asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "Town meeting," Thomas replied grimly. "Mayor Preston called it this morning. I'd planned to attend myself. About the drought, about you." Abigail's face paled. "I see." Thomas studied her face. "You're not surprised. I've seen this before, Mr. Zachary. When I was a child in Pennsylvania, a woman in our town was blamed for a sickness that killed several children. They drove her out. Some wanted worse. And was she responsible?" Abigail met his gaze directly. She was a midwife who tried to teach the importance of cleanliness. The doctor resented her. The children died of scarlet fever. Thomas nodded slowly. "Will you attend the meeting to listen to them condemn me?" "I think not." "Perhaps it would be better if you did," Thomas suggested. "Let them see you as a person, not a shadow to fear." Abigail considered this. "Would you? Would you accompany me?" "I was hoping you'd ask." They changed direction, heading toward the growing crowd. As they approached, Abigail could hear Mayor Preston's voice rising above the others. "We've all noticed it. 8 months without proper rain, cattle dying, crops failing. And it all started when a sequence of unusually hot, dry winds blew in from the south." Thomas interrupted loudly as they reached the edge of the gathering. Heads turned, expressions shifting from surprise at seeing Thomas to outright hostility at the sight of Abigail beside him. Mayor Preston, a corpulent man with a handlebar mustache that seemed to droop in the heat, glared at the newcomers. "Mr. Zachary, we're discussing serious town business here." "So I hear," Thomas replied easily. "And since the Triple Z Ranch employs half the men in this town and owns water rights to the North Fork, I reckon that makes it my business too." "This ain't about water rights," called out Jeremiah Winters, the blacksmith whose forge had been largely idle since the drought began. "It's about her." He jabbed a finger toward Abigail. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "My youngest is sick with fever," cried Sarah Jenkins, cradling an infant to her chest. "The well's gone brackish. Nothing's right since she came." "And what exactly is Miss Owens supposed to have done?" Thomas asked, his voice carrying. "Called down the drought with spells, poisoned the wells. What evidence do you have beyond timing?" "She's got them books with strange writing," someone shouted. "Latin," Abigail said quietly, but her voice carried in the sudden hush. "And Greek. My father was a professor, he taught me." "No decent woman needs such learning," Martha Hillman said with a sniff. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his weathered face grave beneath his hat. "Now, folks, let's be reasonable. No one's accusing Miss Owens of witchcraft exactly, aren't they?" Thomas challenged, moving slightly in front of Abigail. "Because that's what I'm hearing." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "There have been concerns, strange herbs growing in her garden, lights in her cabin at all hours, and yes, the drought." "I grow herbs because I was raised to know their medicinal properties," Abigail said, finding her voice. "I keep lights burning because I read when I cannot sleep, and as for the drought—" She looked around at the hostile faces. "I have prayed for rain as fervently as any of you." "Prayed to who?" Reverend Clark asked, stepping forward with his Bible clutched to his chest. "I've not seen you in church, Miss Owens." "I pray in my own way, Reverend," Abigail replied steadily. The crowd's muttering grew louder. Mayor Preston raised his hands. "The fact remains, Snake River was prosperous before Miss Owens arrived. Now we face ruin. Perhaps it's mere coincidence, but can we afford to take that chance?" "What exactly are you suggesting, Mayor?" Thomas asked, his hand moving casually to rest near his holstered revolver. The mayor's eyes narrowed. "I'm suggesting that Miss Owens might consider moving on, for the good of the town, for her own good even." "And if she chooses to stay," Thomas pressed, "then we can't be responsible for what might happen," Jeremiah Winters growled. Thomas surveyed the crowd slowly, his expression hardening. "I believe you'll find that you will be responsible, Jeremiah. Every man here will answer to the law if any harm comes to Miss Owens." Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. "Now, Thomas, no one's talking about harm, aren't they?" Thomas cut him off. "Because it sounds to me like a threat was just made in front of the sheriff and half the town. I wonder what Judge Roberts would make of that when he rides circuit next month." A tense silence fell over the gathering. "Mr. Zachary," Abigail said softly, touching his arm. "Perhaps the mayor is right. Perhaps I should go." "No." Thomas's voice was firm. "This is your home now. You've broken no law. You've harmed no one. The drought," someone began, "is a natural occurrence," Thomas finished. "Idaho territory has seen them before and will see them again. When I first came here 15 years ago, the old-timers spoke of a drought that lasted nearly 3 years. Who did they blame then? No one answered. I'm offering a solution," Mayor Preston insisted. One that protects everyone's interests. And I'm rejecting it, Thomas replied. Miss Owens stays if she wishes to stay, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Thomas Zachary's reputation as a fair but dangerous man was well established. He'd fought in the war between the states, returned to tame one of the wildest stretches of the territory, and was known to be lethal with both gun and fist when provoked. Mayor Preston's face reddened. You're choosing a stranger over your neighbors, Zachary. People won't forget that. I'm choosing justice over superstition, Thomas corrected. And as for being neighbors, I've watched how quickly you've all turned on one of your own. Makes me wonder who you'll blame next when the drought continues after Miss Owens is gone. He turned to Abigail, offering his arm. May I escort you home, Miss Owens? Heart pounding, Abigail took his arm. Thank you, Mr. Zachary. They walked away from the stunned crowd, the weight of dozens of hostile stares on their backs. They'll not forget this, Abigail murmured when they were out of earshot. You've made enemies today. Thomas's smile was grim. I've made enemies for less worthy causes. As they reached the edge of town where Abigail's small cabin stood, she turned to face him. Why did you defend me? You barely know me. Thomas was quiet for a moment, looking toward the distant mountains where clouds gathered but never seemed to reach the valley. My mother was driven from her home in Georgia during the war. She was different too, had notions about equality that didn't sit well. I watched a mob destroy everything she'd built. I swore I'd never stand by and watch it happen to another innocent. I'm sorry about your mother, Abigail said softly. She survived, started over, taught me that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about doing what's right despite your fear. He studied her face. Are you afraid, Miss Owens? Yes, she admitted, but I won't be driven out by ignorance. Thomas nodded, approval warming his eyes. Then may I call on you tomorrow? I suspect you could use a friend in the days ahead. I would like that very much, Mr. Zachary. He tipped his hat and turned to go, then paused. One more thing, Miss Owens. Yes. I've been watching those clouds building over the Sawtooths for 3 days now. The wind's shifting. I believe we might see rain before the week is out. With that, he strode back toward town, leaving Abigail with the first glimmer of hope she'd felt in weeks. That night, Abigail sat by her window, a candle burning as she wrote in her journal. The confrontation in town had shaken her more than she cared to admit. Part of her wanted to pack her few belongings and slip away in the darkness. She had enough saved to start over somewhere else. But another part, a stronger part, refused to be driven away by superstition and fear. And then there was Thomas Zachary. His unexpected defense had touched something in her, awakened feelings she'd thought long buried after her disastrous courtship back east. The memory of James Wilson's betrayal still stung, how quickly he'd abandoned their engagement when her family's fortunes fell after her father's death. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Abigail froze, her pen dripping ink onto the page. It was well past 9. No decent caller would come so late. Miss Owens. A female voice called softly. It's Clara Wilson, Dr. Wilson's wife. Please, I need your help. Cautiously, Abigail approached the door. Mrs. Wilson. What's wrong? It's Annie Mason. The baby's coming early and there's trouble. My husband's away in boys. Please, I know you have knowledge of these matters. Abigail hesitated only a moment before opening the door. Clara Wilson stood on her porch, her face lined with worry beneath her bonnet. The Masons live on the other side of town, Abigail said, already reaching for her shawl and the basket where she kept her herbs and supplies. They were at the meeting today. They won't want my help. They don't have a choice, Clara replied grimly. I've done what I can, but the baby's turned wrong. You helped Mrs. Jenkins last winter before people started talking. Abigail nodded, gathering what she might need. The irony wasn't lost on her. Sarah Jenkins had been among her accusers today, apparently forgetting who had safely delivered her child during a blizzard when the doctor couldn't get through. "I'll come," she said, "but you should know it might make things worse for both of us." "A mother and child's lives matter more than gossip," Clara said firmly. They hurried through the darkened town, keeping to the shadows. The Mason home was ablaze with lamps, and even from outside, Abigail could hear Emma Mason's cries of pain. Robert Mason met them at the door, his normally jovial face tight with fear. He balked when he saw Abigail. "What's she doing here?" "Saving your wife and child, God willing," Clara said, brushing past him. "Unless you'd prefer to deliver this baby yourself." Robert's protest died on his lips as another scream came from the bedroom. He stepped aside, his eyes not meeting Abigail's as she passed. The next 4 hours were a blur of focused effort. The baby was indeed positioned wrong, but Abigail had assisted her grandmother, a midwife, many times before coming west. With gentle, firm hands and soothing words, she worked to turn the infant. Clara proved a capable assistant, following Abigail's instructions without question. Dawn was breaking when the newborn's cry finally filled the room. A boy, small but healthy, with a shock of dark hair and strong lungs that belied his early arrival. "You have a son, Mrs. Mason," Abigail said, placing the swaddled infant in Emma's trembling arms. Emma, exhausted but radiant, looked up with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "They said you were, but I never believed." Robert Mason appeared in the doorway, his face transforming at the sight of his wife and child. "Emma, the baby. Come meet your son," Emma said weakly. "Miss Owens saved us both." Robert approached the bed cautiously, as if he feared Abigail might cast some spell if he came too close. But as he gazed down at his son, something in his expression changed. "Miss Owens," he said gruffly, not looking up from the baby, "I'm in your debt." Abigail, washing her hands in a basin, simply nodded. "Care for them well, Mr. Mason. Your wife will need rest and plenty of fluids. The baby should nurse as soon as possible and as often as he wants." She gathered her things, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Clara touched her arm. "Let me walk you home," she offered. "It's still early." But as they stepped onto the porch, they found Thomas Zachary waiting, hat in hand. "Mr. Zachary," Clara exclaimed, "what brings you here at this hour? Word travels fast in Snake River," he said, his eyes on Abigail. "Even at night." "I thought Miss Owens might appreciate an escort home." Abigail felt warmth spread through her despite her fatigue. "That's very kind, Mr. Zachary." Clara looked between them, a small smile playing at her lips. "Well then, I should get back to my own home before the town has more to gossip about. Miss Owens, thank you. I've learned more tonight than in all my years of assisting my husband." After Clara departed, Thomas offered Abigail his arm. "How is the mother and the child?" "Both well, thank God." "It was difficult, but Emma Mason is strong." "As are you," Thomas observed. "Coming to help despite how they've treated you." Abigail shrugged slightly. "I couldn't refuse. A life is a life." They walked in companionable silence through the awakening town. Already, Abigail noticed, whispers followed them, but they seemed different somehow. Less accusatory, more curious. At her cabin, Thomas stopped at the foot of the steps. "You should rest. It's been a long night." "Yes," Abigail agreed, suddenly shy. "Thank you for coming to find me." Thomas smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "I told you yesterday I intended to call on you today. I always keep my word, Miss Owens." "Abigail," she said impulsively. "Please call me Abigail." "Abigail," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Then you must call me Thomas." "Thomas," she echoed. Will I see you later, after I've rested? Count on it. He looked up at the sky where clouds had continued to gather overnight, and perhaps by then we'll have more reason to celebrate. As Abigail closed her door behind her, she heard the first distant rumble of thunder. Thomas rode back to the Triple Z ranch with his thoughts full of Abigail Owens. Something about her had caught his attention from the moment she'd arrived in Snake River last autumn, her quiet dignity, the intelligence in her green eyes, the gentle way she moved through the world. When the drought had begun and whispers started, he'd watched with growing concern as the town turned against her. He hadn't intended to become her champion, but seeing her face that hostile crowd yesterday had awakened something protective in him. Something he hadn't felt since losing his young wife and infant son to fever 12 years earlier. The thought of Rebecca and little James still brought an ache to his chest, but for the first time, the memories didn't overwhelm him. Perhaps it was time to consider a future again. As Thomas approached the ranch house, his foreman, Illy Morgan, rode out to meet him. "Boss, we got trouble at the north pasture," Illy reported without preamble. "Someone cut the fence overnight. 40 head scattered into the hills before we caught it." Thomas's mood darkened instantly. "Rustlers?" "Don't think so. No cattle missing that we can tell, just scattered. Seems more like mischief, or a message." "A message," Thomas repeated, dismounting. "Any idea who?" Illy hesitated. "Word is you stood up for the Owens woman yesterday, made some folks unhappy." "I stood for what was right," Thomas said firmly. "If someone's taking issue with that, they'd best come to me directly instead of threatening my livelihood." "Winters was drinking heavy at the saloon last night," Illy offered. "Him and his boys left late, heading north." Thomas nodded grimly. The blacksmith had the most to lose if the drought continued. No crops meant farmers couldn't afford new tools or repairs. And Jeremiah Winters had been the most vocal against Abigail. "Get a crew together," Thomas instructed. "Round up those cattle, and double the watch on the rest of the herd." "Already done, but Thomas," Illy looked uncomfortable. "Some of the boys are wondering if maybe there's something to these rumors about the drought and the Owens woman." Thomas fixed his foreman with a hard stare. "Illy, you've ridden with me for 10 years. Have you ever known me to believe in superstitious nonsense?" "No, but there's no but. Either you trust my judgment or you don't. Miss Owens is no more responsible for this drought than you or I, and if any of my men can't accept that, they can collect their pay and move on." Illy nodded slowly. "I'm with you, boss. Always have been. Just thought you should know what's being said. I appreciate that." Thomas glanced at the sky where dark clouds continued to build. "Besides, I've got a feeling our dry spell is about to break." As if in response, another roll of thunder sounded, closer now. Illy smiled. "That would sure change some minds around here." "Maybe," Thomas allowed. "Or maybe they'll just find someone else to blame for their troubles. Get some rest, Illy. I'll ride out to the north pasture myself once I've changed horses." But before Thomas could saddle a fresh mount, the sky opened. Rain, real, soaking rain, began to fall for the first time in 8 months. He stood in the yard, face turned upward, letting the cooling drops wash over him. The ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse, whooping and hollering like children. Even Illy, usually so reserved, grinned broadly as the rain plastered his hair to his forehead. "Guess Miss Owens broke her own curse," he remarked wryly. Thomas chuckled. "Guess so. Keep an eye on things here. I'm heading back to town. In this," Illy gestured at the increasingly heavy downpour, "especially in this." Thomas rode through the rain, excitement building in his chest. By the time he reached Snake River, the main street had turned to mud, but people were out anyway, standing in the deluge with faces upturned and arms spread wide. He spotted Abigail outside her cabin, hair unbound and dress already soaked through. She was laughing, spinning slowly with her face to the sky. The sight of her, uninhibited and joyful, made his heart beat faster. "Told you it was coming," he called as he approached. She turned, her smile widening at the sight of him. "Thomas, isn't it glorious?" He dismounted, not caring that mud splashed his boots. "It surely is." They stood facing each other in the rain, both dripping and grinning like fools. "What will they say now, I wonder?" Abigail mused, gesturing toward the town. "Hard to blame you for a drought when it's raining buckets," Thomas replied. "Unless they think I somehow caused this too. Let them talk. Truth has a way of coming out eventually." Abigail's smile faltered slightly. "Does it? Not always in my experience." "Then we'll help it along," Thomas said firmly. "Starting with dinner at my ranch tomorrow evening." Abigail blinked in surprise. "Are you inviting me to dinner, Mr. Zachary?" "Thomas," he corrected. "And yes, I am. It's time the town sees that you have friends, influential friends who won't be swayed by gossip and superstition." "And is that all this is? A political statement?" Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping. "No, Abigail, that's not all this is." The air between them seemed to crackle with more than just the distant lightning. "Then I accept," she said softly. "Though I have nothing suitable to wear to dine with the owner of the Triple Z." Thomas smiled. "Wear anything you like. Or come in this," he added, gesturing to her rain-soaked dress. "You look beautiful regardless." A becoming blush colored Abigail's cheeks. "Careful, Mr. Zachary, people will talk." "Let them," he said simply. "I'll send a buggy for you at 5 tomorrow." With that, he tipped his hat, water streaming from the brim, and returned to his horse. As he rode away, he felt lighter than he had in years, despite his sodden clothes. The rain continued through the day and into the night, a steady, soaking downpour that seemed determined to make up for lost time. By morning, the Snake River had risen noticeably, and the parched earth had darkened to a rich brown. Even the air smelled different, clean and fresh, carrying the scent of wet sage and pine from the mountains. Abigail woke to knocking at her door. Wrapping a shawl around her nightdress, she opened it to find Clara Wilson holding a covered basket. "Good morning," Clara said cheerfully. "I've brought fresh bread and preserves. A small thank you for your help with the masons." "That's very kind," Abigail said, touched by the gesture. "Please come in." Clara entered, looking around the neat cabin with interest. "It's lovely in here, so many books." She approached Abigail's small bookshelf, running her finger along the spines. "My father was a teacher. I miss being surrounded by books." "You're welcome to borrow any that interest you," Abigail offered, setting about making tea. Clara smiled gratefully. "I might take you up on that." She hesitated. "I should tell you things are changing in town. Emma Mason has been singing your praises to anyone who'll listen, and with the rain." She gestured toward the window where water still streamed down the glass. "One good deed and a coincidence won't change everyone's minds," Abigail said pragmatically. "Perhaps not everyone," Clara conceded, "but it's a start, and having Thomas Zachary in your corner doesn't hurt either." Abigail busied herself with the teapot, hoping Clara wouldn't notice her blush. "Mr. Zachary has been kind. Mr. Zachary has never shown such interest in any woman since his wife died," Clara said bluntly. "The whole town is talking about it." "There's nothing to talk about," Abigail protested. "He's simply being a gentleman." Clara's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "Well, gentleman or not, he's invited you to dinner at his ranch. That's significant, Abigail." "How did you know about that? Small towns," Clara said with a shrug. "No secrets. His housekeeper, Mrs. Fletcher, was in the mercantile at dawn buying extra coffee and asking Mr. Henderson if he had any fresh flowers." Abigail couldn't help but laugh. "And from this, The town concludes what? That Thomas Zachary is sweet on you, of course. Clara's expression sobered. Not everyone is pleased about it. Jeremiah Winters was ranting in the saloon last night, even after the rain started. Said you trapped the most eligible bachelor in the county with your wiles. That's absurd, Abigail said, setting teacups on the table with more force than necessary. Mr. Zachary Thomas is a grown man who makes his own decisions. Of course he is, Clara agreed. But be careful, Abigail. Winters is dangerous when he's drinking, and he's been drinking a lot lately. I'll be careful, Abigail promised, and I appreciate the warning and the company. It's been lonely since I came here. Clara reached across the table to squeeze her hand. Well, you have at least 2 friends now, 3, counting Emma Mason. That's a start, isn't it? A very good start, Abigail agreed, feeling hope bloom in her chest for the first time since the drought began. After Clara left, Abigail turned her attention to the evening ahead. Her wardrobe was limited. She'd sold most of her finer clothes to finance her journey west, but she still had one good dress that had belonged to her mother. It was a decade out of style, but made of fine blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes. She'd been saving it for a special occasion. Dinner with Thomas Zachary certainly qualified. As promised, a buggy arrived at 5 o'clock, but to Abigail's surprise, Thomas himself was driving it rather than a ranch hand. I hope you don't mind, he said as he helped her up. I wanted the pleasure of your company for the drive. Abigail settled her skirts, acutely aware of his hand lingering on hers. Not at all. It's a beautiful evening for a drive. It was indeed beautiful. The rain had stopped around noon, leaving the world washed clean. Wildflowers that had lain dormant during the drought were already pushing tiny green shoots through the mud, promising color in the days to come. Your dress, Thomas said as they left the town behind. That blue is remarkable with your eyes. Abigail smiled, pleased he'd noticed. It was my mother's, one of the few things of hers I kept. You must miss your parents. Every day, she admitted. They raised me to be independent, to think for myself. My father believed women deserved education equal to men, not a popular view even back east. He sounds like a man ahead of his time, Thomas commented. I'd have liked to meet him. He would have liked you, Abigail said with certainty. He valued honesty and courage above all, as do I. Thomas's eyes met hers briefly before returning to the road. Is that why you came west? To find a place where your independence would be valued. Abigail considered the question. Partly. After my parents died, there seemed little reason to stay. My father's position at the university wasn't held for me, despite my qualifications. The man they hired instead had half my father's knowledge but the right gender. Their loss, Thomas said simply, and Snake River's gain. They crested a rise, and the Triple Z Ranch came into view below them. Abigail caught her breath. She'd heard it was the largest operation in the county, but seeing it spread out before her, the sprawling ranch house, the well-kept barns and corrals, pastures stretching to the horizon, gave her a new appreciation for Thomas's position. It's magnificent, she said softly. It's home, Thomas replied, pride evident in his voice. My father started with nothing but 50 acres and a dozen cattle, built it acre by acre, head by head. And you've continued his work. Thomas nodded, expanded it. We run over 2,000 head now, and the ranch covers nearly 10,000 acres. You must be very proud. I am, he admitted, though there are days I wonder if it was worth the sacrifice. What sacrifice? Abigail asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Solitude, I suppose. After Rebecca and James died, I threw myself into the ranch. It was easier than facing an empty house. Abigail's heart constricted at the pain in his voice. "I'm so sorry, Thomas. It was a long time ago," he said, his tone suggesting the subject was closed for now. As they approached the ranch house, Abigail was surprised to see several other buggies and horses already there. "I hope you don't mind," Thomas said, noting her expression. "I invited a few others to join us, people whose opinions matter in Snake River." Understanding dawned. "You're trying to rehabilitate my reputation." Thomas smiled ruefully. "Is it that obvious?" "A bit," Abigail admitted, "though I'm not sure it will work." "Trust me," he said, bringing the buggy to a stop. "These are good people who have just been caught up in fear. Once they know you, really know you, they'll see what I see." "And what do you see, Thomas Zachary?" Abigail asked softly. His eyes held hers, serious and intent. "A remarkable woman who deserves far better than Snake River has given her so far." Before she could respond, the front door opened, and an older woman in a crisp apron appeared. "Mr. Zachary, you're cutting it mighty close. The roast is ready and your guests are already in the parlor." "Mrs. Fletcher, may I present Miss Abigail Owens?" Thomas said formally. "Abigail, this is Mrs. Fletcher, who has managed my household for 15 years and treats me like an unruly child despite my gray hairs." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Owens," Mrs. Fletcher said, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "I've heard a great deal about you." "Likewise," Abigail replied, wondering exactly what the housekeeper had heard. Mrs. Fletcher turned back to Thomas. "Judge and Mrs. Roberts arrived early. They're most eager to meet your guest." Thomas offered Abigail his arm. "Shall we?" Taking a deep breath, Abigail placed her hand on his arm. "Let's make some new impressions, shall we?" The dinner party proved to be a carefully orchestrated affair. Thomas had indeed invited influential people, Judge Roberts and his wife, who oversaw the circuit court, Dr. Wilson and Clara, the banker, Mr. Hollister and his wife, and Reverend Clark and his daughter Hannah. All were people whose good opinion could shift the tide of sentiment in Snake River. To Abigail's relief, they were welcoming if reserved at first. Judge Roberts, a courtly gentleman with a shock of white hair, was particularly interested in her father's academic work. Dr. Wilson, perhaps prompted by his wife, asked thoughtful questions about Abigail's knowledge of herbal remedies. "My grandfather was a country doctor," he admitted over the roast beef. "He swore by many of the same treatments you've described. Modern medicine sometimes forgets the wisdom of the past." By dessert, Mrs. Fletcher's renowned apple pie, the atmosphere had warmed considerably. Reverend Clark, who had been the most distant initially, surprised Abigail by asking about her views on certain biblical translations. "I understand you read Greek," he said. "I've often thought our English Bible loses some of the nuance of the original texts." "It does," Abigail agreed eagerly. "Especially in the Psalms and Proverbs." A lively discussion ensued, during which Abigail forgot to be nervous about making a good impression. When she glanced at Thomas, she found him watching her with a smile that warmed her from within. After dinner, the men retired to Thomas's study for cigars while the women gathered in the parlor. Mrs. Roberts, a formidable woman with intelligent eyes, sat beside Abigail on the settee. "My dear," she said without preamble, "I owe you an apology. I allowed myself to be influenced by gossip rather than seeking the truth directly." Abigail blinked in surprise. "That's very kind, Mrs. Roberts, but unnecessary." "It is entirely necessary," the older woman insisted. "A judge's wife should know better than to condemn without evidence. I intend to make it clear to my friends that you are a woman of education and refinement who has been wrongly maligned." "As do I," Mrs. Hollister chimed in. "My Henry says Mr. Zachary has never shown better judgment than in befriending you." Only Hannah Clark remained silent, studying Abigail with curious eyes. Miss Clark, Abigail prompted gently, you seem to have something on your mind. Hannah flushed. I was just wondering if perhaps you might consider teaching some of us. I've always wished for more education than our little school provides. Clara Wilson nodded eagerly. What a wonderful idea! Abigail, you could offer classes for the women of Snake River. Share your knowledge. The suggestion took Abigail by surprise. I hadn't considered teaching. It would be an excellent way to become more integrated into the community, Mrs. Roberts said thoughtfully, and to demonstrate the value of your education. The idea began to take root in Abigail's mind. Perhaps a small class at first, literature, perhaps, or languages. Or medicine, Clara suggested. Basic nursing and herbcraft. It would be invaluable, especially for those on outlying farms. By the time the men rejoined them, the women had outlined a plan for Abigail to begin teaching twice weekly in the church meeting room. Reverend Clark, informed of the plan by his daughter, gave his cautious blessing. Education is a gift from God, he said, though his expression suggested he still had reservations. If Miss Owens is willing to share her knowledge, the church should support such efforts. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Abigail found herself filled with a new sense of possibility. Perhaps Thomas had been right, perhaps she could find acceptance in Snake River after all. Judge Roberts shook her hand firmly as he left. Miss Owens, I look forward to attending one of your lectures. My wife tells me you're quite knowledgeable about classical literature. You would be most welcome, Your Honor, Abigail replied, still somewhat dazed by the evening's turn. When the last guests had departed, Thomas found Abigail in the parlor, gazing out at the star-filled sky. You've conquered them all, he said softly, coming to stand beside her. Just as I knew you would. Abigail turned to him, her eyes shining. Thank you for this evening. For believing in me when no one else would. It was my pleasure, Thomas said, and entirely self-serving, I assure you. Oh, how so? Now I won't have to fight duels with half the town to defend your honor, he said with a smile, though I would have if necessary. My knight in dusty leather, Abigail teased, but her voice held genuine warmth. Thomas took her hand, his expression growing serious. Abigail, I need to be honest with you. My interest in you goes beyond neighborly concern or even friendship. Abigail's heart quickened. Does it? Yes, he said simply. I find myself thinking of you at odd moments, wondering what you're doing, what you're reading, hoping to see you in town. I've thought of you too, Abigail admitted softly. More than I should, perhaps. Thomas's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. I know it's soon. We barely know each other, and after what you've been through with the town's accusations. Time matters less than understanding, Abigail said, and you've shown me who you are, Thomas Zachary, a man of principle who stands for what's right, even when it's difficult. And you've shown me a woman of remarkable courage and intelligence, Thomas replied. I would very much like to court you properly, Abigail Owens, with your permission. Abigail felt a smile bloom on her face, as natural and inevitable as the wildflowers after rain. I would like that very much. Thomas raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then I'll drive you home, and tomorrow I'll call on you again, and the day after. People will talk, Abigail warned, though her tone was light. Let them, Thomas said. This time, they'll be talking about something real. The following week saw a transformation in Snake River's attitude toward Abigail. The rains continued intermittently, bringing life back to the parched land. Crops that farmers had given up for lost began to recover. The river rose to its normal levels. And as the town's fortunes improved, the accusations against Abigail faded. Her classes, begun tentatively with just 5 students, quickly grew to 15. Women from town and outlying farms came to learn about literature, basic medicine, and even some mathematics. To her surprise, a few men began to attend as well, sitting awkwardly at the back of the room but listening intently. True to his word, Thomas called on her daily. Sometimes they rode across the rangelands surrounding the Triple Z, Abigail on a gentle mare he'd given her to borrow indefinitely. Other days, they simply sat on her porch, talking until the stars came out. He told her about his childhood in Georgia, his father's dreams for the ranch, the devastation of losing Rebecca and James. She shared stories of her parents, her education, her disastrous engagement to James Wilson. "He left when my family lost everything," she explained one evening as they watched the sunset paint the western sky. "Said he couldn't marry a woman with no dowry and no prospects. Then he was a fool," Thomas said firmly, "and I'm grateful for his foolishness as it brought you west." Not everyone approved of their courtship. Jeremiah Winters continued to mutter darkly about Abigail's influence, though fewer people listened now. His smithy was busy again as the town recovered, but he seemed to resent that Abigail's reputation had been restored along with the rains. "He blames you for his troubles during the drought," Thomas explained after Winters had pointedly ignored Abigail in the general store, "and he can't admit he was wrong without accepting responsibility for his own failings." "Some people need someone to blame," Abigail said with a sigh. "It's easier than facing their own shortcomings." Despite Winters's continued animosity, life in Snake River had become more than bearable. It had become good. Abigail found friends among her students. Clara Wilson became a particular confidante, visiting often and borrowing books regularly. Even Emma Mason, once recovered from childbirth, joined Abigail's medical class with her infant son in tow. "You saved my life and little Robert's," she said simply, when Abigail expressed surprise at her attendance. "I want to learn to do the same for others if needed." As summer bloomed across the valley, Thomas and Abigail's courtship deepened. They attended church together on Sundays, took picnics by the now flowing river, and spent long evenings discussing books, politics, and their hopes for the future. Abigail found herself falling in love with his steady strength, his quiet intelligence, and his unwavering support of her independence. For his part, Thomas discovered in Abigail the partner he'd never expected to find again, someone who challenged his thinking, who brought laughter back into his life, who saw the ranch not just as a business but as the home it had once been. On a warm evening in late July, Thomas took Abigail to a hilltop overlooking the Triple Z. Wildflowers carpeted the slope, and the setting sun gilded the landscape. "I brought Rebecca here when I asked her to marry me," Thomas said quietly. "It was her favorite spot on the ranch." Abigail took his hand. "It's beautiful." "I wasn't sure if I should tell you that," he admitted. "I don't want to live in the past, but I don't want to pretend it didn't exist either." "Rebecca was part of your life," Abigail said gently. "She helped make you the man you are, the man I've come to love. I would never want you to forget her." Thomas turned to her, his eyes intense. "You love me," Abigail smiled, realizing what she'd said. "Yes, Thomas, I love you, more than I thought possible." He pulled her close, his arms strong around her. "I love you too, Abigail Owens, with all my heart." Their first kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally drew apart, both were breathless. "Marry me," Thomas said, still holding her close. "Be my wife, my partner. Share my life and my home." "Yes," Abigail whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. They announced their engagement the following Sunday after church. Most of the congregation offered genuine congratulations. Mrs. Roberts hugged Abigail warmly. Clara Wilson wept happy tears. Even Reverend Clark seemed pleased, offering a blessing on their union. Only Jeremiah Winters and a few of his cronies stood apart, watching with dark expressions. "Ignore them," Thomas murmured as they walked toward the buggy. "Their bitterness is their own problem." But later that week, as Abigail walked home from teaching her evening class, she realized the problem might not be so easily dismissed. Footsteps sounded behind her in the gathering darkness, too heavy to be a woman's, too deliberate to be coincidental. She quickened her pace, clutching her books tighter. The footsteps accelerated to match. Heart pounding, Abigail turned onto Main Street, hoping the saloon's lights would provide some safety. "Miss Owens," a slurred voice called. "Or should I say the future Mrs. Zachary?" Jeremiah Winters stepped into the pool of light cast by the saloon's windows, his face flushed with drink. Two other men flanked him, ranch hands who'd been vocal in blaming her for the drought. "Good evening, Mr. Winters," Abigail said, striving to keep her voice steady. "If you'll excuse me, it's getting late." "Not so fast," Winters said, moving to block her path. "I want to know what spell you cast on Thomas Zachary. Man never looked twice at a woman since his wife died, then you show up and suddenly he's besotted." "That's enough, Jeremiah," a new voice said sharply. Sheriff Miller stepped out of the saloon, hand resting casually on his holstered gun. "Miss Owens is right. It's getting late and she should be getting home." Winters scowled but stepped aside. "Just having a friendly conversation, Sheriff." "Didn't sound friendly to me," Miller replied evenly. "Miss Owens, may I escort you home?" "Thank you, Sheriff," Abigail said, relief washing through her. "I would appreciate that." As they walked away, she could feel Winters's eyes boring into her back. "You should be more careful," Sheriff Miller advised once they were out of earshot. "Winters has been drinking heavily lately, talking wild about you and Thomas." "What does he say?" Miller hesitated. "Nothing worth repeating, but he's stirring up trouble among some of the young hotheads. Men who lost work during the drought and need someone to blame." "The drought is over," Abigail pointed out. "Has been for weeks." "Some grudges don't wash away with the rain," Miller said sagely. "Just watch yourself until after the wedding, once you're Mrs. Zachary, living out at the Triple Z with ranch hands around, Winters won't dare cause trouble." At her cabin, the sheriff tipped his hat. "I'll have a deputy keep an eye out when you're teaching late, and you might mention this to Thomas." "I don't want to worry him," Abigail protested. "He'd want to know," Miller said firmly. "Winters was once his friend. This would pain him, but he needs to be aware." Reluctantly, Abigail agreed. The next day, when Thomas came to take her riding, she told him about the encounter. His expression darkened dangerously. "I should have a word with Jeremiah." "That would only make things worse," Abigail argued. "He's looking for confrontation. Don't give him one." "I won't have you threatened," Thomas said, his voice tight with anger. "I wasn't threatened exactly," Abigail soothed. "Just made uncomfortable." "Sheriff Miller was there. He's having a deputy watch out for me." Thomas was silent for a long moment, visibly struggling with his temper. "We could move the wedding up," he suggested finally. "No reason to wait until September." The idea held appeal. They'd set the date to allow time for Abigail's aunt from Pennsylvania to travel west for the ceremony. But a letter had arrived just yesterday saying she was too frail to make the journey. "What about the preparations? Mrs. Fletcher would be scandalized if we changed everything now." Thomas grinned suddenly. "Mrs. Fletcher is tougher than she looks, and I suspect she'd be delighted to have you at the ranch sooner rather than later. She's already rearranging furniture in the master bedroom to make space for your books." Warmth bloomed in Abigail's chest at the thought. "She is." "She approves of you," Thomas said, drawing her into his arms. "Says it's about time I found a woman with sense to match my own stubbornness." Abigail laughed. "High praise indeed. Very well, Thomas, let's not wait. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, he agreed, sealing the decision with a kiss. Word of the changed wedding date spread quickly through Snake River. Most assumed Abigail must be with child, despite her modest behavior and the obvious respect Thomas showed her. Such gossip was inevitable and easily ignored. What couldn't be ignored was the increasing hostility from Jeremiah Winters and his small circle. Twice more, Abigail encountered them while walking in town. Though they made no direct threats, their presence felt menacing. Thomas, true to his protective nature, began escorting her everywhere or sending ranch hands to do so when he couldn't. Abigail chafed slightly at the restriction on her independence, but understood the necessity. 3 days before the wedding, disaster struck. Abigail woke in the night to the smell of smoke and the crackling of flames. Her cabin was on fire, the blaze already consuming the front porch. Coughing in the thickening smoke, she grabbed her mother's locket and her father's pocket watch, her most precious possessions, and fled through the bedroom window. The night air was cool against her skin as she stumbled away from the burning building in her nightdress. Shouts rang out as townspeople noticed the fire. Men formed a bucket brigade from the well, but it was clear the cabin couldn't be saved. The dry timber burned too hot and fast. Sheriff Miller found Abigail wrapped in a blanket someone had provided, watching her home and possessions turn to ash. "Miss Owens," he said grimly. "Are you hurt?" "No," she replied, her voice hoarse from smoke. "I got out in time." Miller's expression was grave. "This wasn't an accident. Someone doused your porch with coal oil." Cold shock washed through her. "You're certain?" "The smell is unmistakable." "And there's this." He held up a whiskey flask. "Found it in the bushes beside your house. Has Jeremiah Winters's initials on it." Abigail stared at the damning evidence. "He tried to kill me, or just destroy your home," Miller said. "Either way, it's arson. I'm going to find him now." "I'm coming with you," said a steely voice behind them. Thomas stood there, his face a mask of controlled fury. He must have ridden hard from the ranch. His horse was lathered with sweat, and his clothes were hastily donned. "Thomas," Abigail said, going to him immediately. "I'm all right." He gathered her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could scarcely breathe. "When I saw the smoke from the ridge." He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm safe," she repeated, feeling his heart hammering against hers. "No thanks to Winters," Thomas growled, releasing her to face the sheriff. "Where is he?" "That's what I aim to find out," Miller replied. "But I don't need a lynch mob, Thomas. I need the law to handle this." "The law hasn't stopped him from harassing Abigail for weeks," Thomas countered. "It didn't prevent this." "And what will you do?" Abigail asked quietly. "Kill him. Become a murderer for my sake." The question seemed to penetrate Thomas's rage. His shoulders slumped slightly. "No, but he will answer for this." "He will," Miller promised, "in a court of law." Judge Roberts won't take kindly to arson, especially against a woman the judge's wife has taken under her wing. In the end, Thomas agreed to let the sheriff handle the matter. Winters wasn't at his home or the saloon, but Miller organized a search party to comb the town and surrounding area. Thomas took Abigail to the Triple Z, where Mrs. Fletcher was already preparing a room and gathering clothes for her. "You'll stay here until we're married," Thomas said, his tone brooking no argument. "After that, you'll stay here because it's your home too." Abigail nodded, the shock beginning to wear off, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. "All my books," she murmured, "my father's papers, my mother's quilt." Thomas gathered her close again. "Things can be replaced, you can't." "I know," she sighed. "It's just everything I brought west, everything that connected me to my past." "We'll build new connections," Thomas promised, "new memories, but first you need to rest." Mrs. Fletcher appeared with a steaming cup. "Drink this, Miss Owens, it'll help you sleep." Abigail recognized the scent of chamomile and valerian herbs she herself might have prescribed. She smiled weakly at the housekeeper. "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher." "Sleep now," Thomas said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I'll be here when you wake." But when Abigail woke hours later, Thomas was gone. Mrs. Fletcher explained that Sheriff Miller had sent word they'd found Winters hiding in an abandoned cabin outside town. "Mr. Zachary went to make sure justice is done," she said, her tone suggesting she had her own ideas about what constituted justice in this case. Abigail dressed hastily in clothes Mrs. Fletcher had provided they'd belonged to Thomas's sister, who occasionally visited from St. Louis and were close enough in size to be serviceable. "I need to go to town," she announced. Mrs. Fletcher frowned. "Mr. Zachary said you were to rest." "And I have," Abigail replied firmly. "Now I need to ensure Thomas doesn't do something he'll regret." The housekeeper studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Illy is outside. He'll drive you." The town was abuzz when Abigail arrived. A crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office, where Miller had presumably brought Winters after his capture. Illy helped her down from the buggy. "Want me to come with you, Miss Owens?" "Thank you, but no," Abigail replied. "Wait here, please." She made her way through the crowd, which parted reluctantly to let her pass. Inside the sheriff's office, she found Thomas and Miller engaged in a heated discussion while Winters sat in a cell, his face bruised and his expression defiant. "Abigail," Thomas exclaimed, seeing her, "you should be resting." "I've rested enough," she said, then turned to the sheriff. "What happens now?" Miller sighed. "Winters denies everything, says the flask was stolen days ago, says he was out hunting, not hiding. And the convenient timing of the fire. The coal oil," Thomas demanded. "Circumstantial," Miller admitted reluctantly, "but Judge Roberts will be here tomorrow. He'll decide if there's enough to hold Winters for trial." "He tried to kill Miss Owens," Thomas said through gritted teeth. "I want to speak with him," Abigail said suddenly. All three men looked at her in surprise. "Absolutely not," Thomas began. "That's not a good idea, Miss Owens," the sheriff said simultaneously. "What's the matter, Zachary?" Winters called from his cell. "Afraid of what your witch might do to me." Thomas started toward the cell, but Abigail caught his arm. "Please, Thomas, let me talk to him. I need to understand." After a long moment, Thomas nodded reluctantly. 5 minutes, with both of us present." Miller unlocked the door to the small room containing the cell. Winters leaned against the bars, a smirk playing at his lips despite his bruised face. "Come to cast another spell, Miss Owens." "I came to ask why," Abigail said simply. "What did I ever do to you, Mr. Winters, to deserve such hatred?" Something flickered in Winters's eyes, surprise, perhaps, at her direct approach. "You came here and everything went wrong," he muttered. The drought was a natural occurrence," Abigail interrupted. "As was the rain that followed it. I had no more power over one than the other." "Then how do you explain Zachary?" Winters demanded, gesturing at Thomas. "Man was a stone wall for years, then you bat your eyelashes and suddenly he's besotted," understanding dawned. "You were friends once, weren't you? You and Thomas." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "We were. Before he started drinking so heavily, before he began blaming others for his troubles." "I blamed you because you deserved it," Winters spat. "The drought hit everyone, but your precious Triple Z kept right on running. You had water when the rest of us were watching our livestock die, and instead of helping, you were too busy courting the witch." "I offered to let the town water their stock at my North Spring," Thomas said, his voice tight. "Mayor Preston refused because it meant acknowledging he'd been wrong about Abigail. And you could have accepted that water anyway, Mr. Winters," Abigail added softly. "Pride is a dangerous thing when lives are at stake. Winters turned away, his shoulders hunched. Doesn't matter now. Judge'll probably hang me for the fire or send me to prison. Did you set the fire, Jeremiah? Thomas asked bluntly. A long silence followed. Finally, Winters sighed. I was drunk. Thought I'd scare her, maybe drive her out of town. Didn't mean for the whole place to go up so fast. You could have killed her, Thomas said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. I know, Winters whispered, suddenly looking older and defeated. I know. Abigail studied the broken man before her. Hatred had consumed him, turned him into someone capable of murder, yet she could find no satisfaction in his downfall. I'll speak to Judge Roberts on your behalf, she said finally. Ask for leniency. Both Thomas and Winters stared at her in shock. Why would you do that? Winters asked. Because hatred solves nothing, Abigail replied simply. And because I refuse to let what you did change who I am. She turned to Thomas. Take me home, please. Outside, the crowd had grown larger, their murmurs rising as Abigail and Thomas emerged from the sheriff's office. What's happening? Someone called. Is Winters confessing? Justice is being served, Thomas replied loudly. The law will handle this matter. As they walked to the buggy warily waited, Clara Wilson hurried up to them, her face concerned. Abigail, are you all right? When I heard about the fire. I'm fine, Abigail assured her. Just tired. She'll be staying at the ranch until the wedding, Thomas added. Which will proceed as planned in 3 days. Clara smiled. I'm glad to hear it, and Abigail, some of us have been talking. We want to help you replace what was lost. Books, clothes, household items. It's not much, but it's everything, Abigail said, deeply touched. Thank you. That's what neighbors do, Clara replied simply. On the ride back to the ranch, Thomas was quiet, his expression thoughtful. You're angry that I offered to speak for Winters, Abigail guessed. Not angry, Thomas corrected. Amazed after what he did. You still show compassion. Compassion isn't the same as forgiveness, Abigail said carefully. I don't forgive what he did. But executing him or sending him to prison for 20 years won't bring back my books or my father's papers. Thomas took her hand. You're a remarkable woman, Abigail Owens. Soon to be Abigail Zachary, she reminded him with a small smile. His answering smile warmed her heart. The best decision I ever made was standing with you that day against the town. And the best decision I ever made was staying to fight rather than running away, Abigail replied. Though I didn't expect to find love in the process. Sometimes the best things in life are unexpected, Thomas said, squeezing her hand. Like finding your future in the middle of a drought. 3 days later, Abigail and Thomas were married in the Snake River Church. The building was filled to capacity, not with accusers this time, but with well-wishers. Judge Roberts himself officiated, his deep voice solemn as he pronounced them husband and wife. Jeremiah Winters's fate had been decided the day before. In consideration of Abigail's testimony and his confession, the judge sentenced him to 5 years in the territorial prison, rather than the 15 the law allowed for arson. It was justice tempered with mercy, a balance Abigail could live with. As Thomas kissed his bride, cheers erupted from the congregation. Outside, dark clouds gathered again, promising more rain for the thirsty land. But this time, no one looked at Abigail with suspicion or fear. Instead, they smiled, sharing in the joy of new beginnings. At the reception held at the Triple Z, Thomas pulled his new wife aside for a moment of privacy. I have something for you, he said, leading her to his study, now their study, with shelves being built specifically for her books. On the desk lay a leather-bound journal. Open it, Thomas urged. Abigail did so, finding the pages filled with his strong, masculine handwriting. What is this? My father kept journals about building the ranch, Thomas explained. After he died, I continued the tradition. This one I started the day I met you, I thought. I thought our children might want to know the story someday. How their mother was blamed for a drought, and how their father stood with her against the angry mob. Tears filled Abigail's eyes as she turned the pages, seeing their story unfold from Thomas's perspective. The last entry, dated that morning, concluded, "Today I marry the strongest, most compassionate woman I've ever known. The drought brought her to me, and for that I will be forever grateful." "Oh, Thomas," Abigail whispered, closing the journal carefully, "it's perfect." He drew her into his arms. "No, you're perfect, and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." "I look forward to every moment," Abigail said, standing on tiptoe to kiss her husband. "Every single moment." Epilogue: 5 years later, the Triple Z Ranch had never been more prosperous. The drought of '79 was now a distant memory, though its lessons remained. Thomas had expanded the irrigation system to better preserve water in dry times, and Abigail's experimental garden showcased plants that could thrive with minimal rainfall. "Mama, look what I found." 4-year-old James Zachary came running across the yard, his hands cupped around some treasure. Abigail set down her basket of herbs and knelt to her son's level. "What is it, sweetheart?" James opened his hands to reveal a tiny frog. "Can I keep him?" "For a little while," Abigail agreed. "But then he needs to go back to the pond. That's his home." The boy nodded solemnly. He had Thomas's eyes and Abigail's thoughtful nature, a combination that both delighted and occasionally exasperated his parents. "Is baby sister awake yet?" he asked, carefully returning the frog to his cupped hands. "Not yet. Your father's watching over her while she naps." As if summoned by the mention, Thomas appeared on the porch with 2-month-old Elizabeth cradled against his chest. His face, tanned from years working outdoors, softened as it always did when he looked at his family. "I believe someone's hungry," he called. Abigail smiled, gathering her basket. "Coming." Inside, she took her daughter, marveling as always at the perfection of tiny fingers and the wisps of dark hair. As she settled in the rocking chair to nurse, Thomas entertained James with an improvised habitat for his frog in a glass jar. A knock at the door announced Mrs. Fletcher, who still managed the household despite her advancing years. "Mrs. Zachary, you have visitors." Clara and Dr. Wilson entered, their own children in tow. Behind them came Emma Mason with young Robert, now a sturdy 5-year-old. "We were in the area and thought we'd stop by," Clara explained, though the basket she carried suggested the visit was planned. "The children wanted to play together." "James, take your friends to see the new foal," Thomas suggested. The children scampered out, supervised by Emma. Clara set her basket on the table. "I've brought the books we discussed, Abigail, and some new herbal samples from back east." Abigail's teaching had evolved over the years into a more formal arrangement. With Dr. Wilson's support, she now instructed several young women in nursing and midwifery, filling a critical need in the growing region. "Excellent," Abigail said. "The classes are going well. Hannah Clark is showing particular promise." "Speaking of Hannah, Dr. Wilson said, she mentioned that Jeremiah Winters has been released from prison. He's staying with his sister and boys for now." Thomas tensed slightly. "Has he said anything about returning to Snake River?" "Apparently not," Dr. Wilson replied. "His sister wrote to Reverend Clark that Jeremiah found religion in prison. Says he's a changed man." "People can change," Abigail said quietly, stroking Elizabeth's cheek as she nursed. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to find a better path." Thomas's hand came to rest on her shoulder, a gesture of support and understanding. "Indeed." After their friends departed and the children were put to bed, Abigail and Thomas sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge. The ranch spread before them, peaceful in the evening light. "I received a letter today," Abigail said, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. "From the University of Idaho. They've accepted my research on drought-resistant native plants for publication." Thomas squeezed her hand proudly. Professor Owens would have been so pleased. "I think he would," Abigail agreed, "though I suspect he'd be even more pleased with his grandchildren." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently beneath them. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice thoughtful. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out if the drought hadn't come or if I hadn't spoken up that day?" "Sometimes," Abigail admitted. "But then I remember something my father used to say. Life's greatest blessings often arrive disguised as its greatest challenges." Thomas smiled, drawing her closer. "Your father was a wise man, he was," Abigail agreed, "and he would have liked you very much, as I would have liked him." Thomas pressed a kiss to her temple. "Though I must admit I'm rather fond of his daughter." Abigail laughed softly. "After 5 years of marriage, I should hope so." "More than fond," Thomas continued, his voice deepening. "Completely, utterly in love. More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today." "Such pretty words from a hardened cowboy," Abigail teased, though her heart swelled with happiness. "Only for you," he promised. "Only ever for you." As night fell fully over the Triple Z Ranch, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from a woman blamed and feared to a respected teacher and researcher, from isolation to a family and community that valued her. It hadn't been an easy path, but the destination had proven worth every difficult step. "I love you, Thomas Zachary," she whispered. His arms tightened around her, his reply a promise kept through 5 years of marriage and countless challenges overcome together. "And I love you, Abigail Zachary." Forever and always. High above, stars winked in a velvet sky, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, not a threat this time, but a reminder of nature's cycles. Drought and rain, hardship and joy, endings and beginnings, all part of the tapestry of a life fully lived and deeply loved.